A physician prepares to take a motion picture for diagnostic reference. This is what he sees, the interior of the human stomach. Films such as this have been difficult to obtain until the advent of a remarkable new technique called fiber optics. I'm John McKenzie. The motion picture you saw a few moments ago was taken through a fiber optic device similar to this one. It not only sends light down into the stomach, but more important and remarkable, it transmits our picture back up despite the fact that the tube is curved. To give us an idea of how and why this light-bending phenomena takes place, Dr. Morris Shamos of New York University talks with Dr. Walter Siegmund, manager of fiber optics for the American Optical Company.
Dr. Siegmund, how would you describe the basic principle of fiber optics?
Well, I would say the basic principle of fiber optics is the ability of a thread or fiber of glass or some other transparent material to transmit light by the phenomenon of total internal reflection.
Perhaps you should explain what you mean by total internal reflection.
Well, this is a remarkable optical phenomenon that occurs whenever you have an interface or boundary between two different optical media of different refractive index. The ray of light entering from the higher refractive index is totally reflected at that interface.
Back into the original
Back
one.
into the original medium, that's correct.
Well, this phenomenon has been known for a very long time, and yet fiber optics is a recently new development. How come?
Well, I would say that it's because the ordinary glass fibers or quartz fibers, although theoretically would transmit light very well, as a practical matter, the surface of the fiber is extremely vulnerable. It can easily be scratched or contaminated with dust or other materials, and this would cause loss of light and low efficiency.
The light leaks out through the sides.
It leaks out through the sides of the bundles due to scattering from these defects.
And if you have a bundle of fibers adjacent to one another, then what happens?
Then the light can leak from one fiber to the next, and this would cause lowering of contrast in the image.
What you call crosstalk.
That's right.
How do you cure this?
Well, about 12 years ago, a system was devised for coating the individual fibers with a medium of lower refractive index, usually a glass, and this causes the surface of the fiber to be protected, insulated, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Can you show me this?
Yes. Here we see a highly magnified view of an uncoated fiber. If we consider a ray fiber, we see that it reflects several times before leaving the fiber. At each of these points, it is possible for some of the light surface of the fiber is either scratched or contaminated. Now, in the case of a coated fiber, shown here, we have protected this delicate surface with the coating so that contamination cannot occur. At the same time, the coating serves to separate neighboring fibers to prevent this crosstalk phenomenon.
Is this a typical ray?
This particular ray that we showed was intended to represent the steepest ray that could enter the fiber, and this defines what we call the numerical aperture of the fiber.
How do you determine that?
Well, this is shown on the next scene. The angle alpha, the Greek letter alpha, was to represent the angle of the incoming ray, and it is related to the indices of refraction of the core of the fiber and the coating by this formula.
These are the two indices of core
These are
and
the
coating.
two indices. This is the index of the core, that of the coating.
Right.
This numerical aperture here is related to a more commonly understood optical term, the F number, by this equation.
And what kind of fibers do you get? What sort of openings or apertures can you get?
It's possible to make fibers which have an angle alpha equal to 90 degrees. This corresponds to an F number of 0.5, which is the equivalent of a very, very fast lens.
Yes, that's extremely fast. What about the length of the fiber? Surely this must influence the properties of it.
Well, unfortunately, all materials do tend to absorb to some extent, so the length of a fiber does affect its transmission. Fortunately, we are able to use glasses that transmit light very well to make optical fibers. Here's an example of a fiber bundle, and this is the transmission curve for that fiber bundle. Here is the transmission, and here is the wavelength extending from 400 millimicrons to 1800 millimicrons in the near infrared part of the spectrum. As we see here, the maximum transmission of the fiber bundle actually occurs in the middle of the visible spectrum at 500 millimicrons.
Now this is a bundle that was 6 feet long,
That is correct.
and it transmitted roughly 60%
That is correct.
of the light that fell upon one end.
Yes.
So that I imagine you can get rather long lengths of
Yes. As a
fiber
matter of fact,
optics.
it is possible to make fiber bundles as much as 100 feet long and still get appreciable light transmission.
Now you've brought some demonstrations along with you. Can we see them?
Yes. I have here what we call a ponytail for sort of obvious reasons. Here is a light source. I've connected the fiber bundle to the light source, and now I think you can see how the fibers actually transmit light. Notice, too, how flexible the fibers are.
Oh, yes. Well, in addition to light coming out the ends, I see some light that seems to be coming out at various points along the fibers. Why is that?
Well, these, unfortunately, are broken fibers. As you know, glass is a brittle material, and over the years that we've handled this, I'm afraid we've broken a number of fibers, and that's the cause.
Okay, but normally you wouldn't have the fibers exposed in this way?
No, they would normally be put into a sheath to protect them. And in a good sheath, the fibers, in fact, are very durable.
Now I can see that for transmitting light, the problems perhaps are not too complex. But suppose you want to transmit images. What are the special problems there?
Well, then, of course, it is necessary to very precisely align the fibers at the two ends of the bundle. This is shown here. Here's the simplest possible fiber bundle, just a stack of parallel fibers in a bundle. If we project onto the left-hand end of this bundle a simple image, it is transmitted bit by bit through the fibers and to the opposite face of the bundle, and is quite recognizable as an image.
Do the fibers actually have to be lined up all for the entire length?
No, it is necessary that only the ends of the fiber bundle be lined up. In between, the fibers can be as flexible as you like, and they can be mixed.
But suppose they did not maintain this one-to-one relationship.
If, in fact, we either through carelessness or deliberately misaligned the fibers, if we projected an image on the left-hand end of this bundle, it would then be quite unrecognizable at the other end of the bundle. This we would call a scrambled fiber bundle.
And now when you have an aligned bundle of this kind, what sort of applications do you have for them?
Well, we've already seen one interesting application, and that is in the case of the gastroscope for looking inside the human stomach. I also know of another application, and that is in the Saturn booster or missile. Here the fiber optics are used to view what is happening during the actual launch of the Saturn booster. On this film, you see the Saturn booster actually taking off from the launch pad. In this scene, we are looking inside of the liquid oxygen tank, and at this moment what we are seeing is the liquid oxygen coming back into the camera lens at the end of the launch phase. In this sequence, we are about to see the actual separation of the first and second stages of the Saturn booster. That's the second stage moving off to the right-hand side of the screen. Both of these scenes were taken through fiber optic bundles similar to the one we have here.
Very dramatic scene. Can you demonstrate this one too?
I think we can. Let's just fasten this directly to one of our studio cameras, as we're doing here.
Now this one is about 6 feet long.
This one's about 6 feet long. And now if we've got everything aligned, we should be able to get an image directly. There you are. You're on the screen right at the moment.
But I'm twisted.
You're twisted. Now it's possible by twisting the bundle to twist you some more. This is a feature of fiber optics that one can rotate the image by rotating the bundle.
What other applications do you have for flexible fibers of this kind?
A very interesting application, in my opinion, is what I call the fiber optics light distributor. I have a fiber bundle here, which is a single bundle at one end, and is 12 separate bundles at the other end.
Just split up into 12.
Split up into 12 components. Now from one light source I've created 12 light sources. This type of device is useful in reading punch cards, and I'd like to demonstrate that for you.
Ah, yes. And then photocells would pick up the light on the other side.
That is correct.
Thank you very much, Dr. Siegmund. Now back to John Mackenzie.
Flexibility is not the only useful characteristic of fiber optics. Fibers can also be fused together to form a solid block of almost any shape or size, capable of transmitting an image from one face to the other. We learn more about this as Dr. Shamos talks with Will Hicks, president of Mosaic Fabrication.
Mr. Hicks, my impression is, and has always been, that the main advantage of fiber optics was the flexibility. And yet I understand this is not your main interest in fiber optics.
No, it's not, and I would say that there's a wide field of applications where flexibility plays no part at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's true that when we first started working in fiber optics, our whole effort was oriented towards achieving one goal, to make a flexible fiber optics gastroscope. In the process of doing this, we developed glass fibers, but we put a plastic coating on them. We did moderately well with these. The transmission was not the best, but was acceptable. Mm-hmm. But due to an outside stimulus from a customer who had an application, the whole course of fiber optics was changed.
What was that?
Well, this customer came in, and he had the job of printing directly from a cathode ray tube. The cathode ray tube is like a television picture tube. Mm-hmm. Of necessity, it has a front window on it. The front window might look something like this. The phosphor is on the inside. You can look through the window and see the image without any trouble, just as you do when you look at your television set. But when you get ready to photograph this, you have a problem. You can either take the photograph with a camera, or, as this customer suggested, if we could make a bundle of fibers which had this general configuration, mm-hmm. we could bodily lift the image from the inside of the tube to the outside of the tube. Presenting the image to the outside of the tube, we could put a film on top, press it in contact, and make a direct print.
Yeah, I see.
This
avoiding the camera, then.
Avoiding the camera, you save the weight, the cost of the camera, and you had more light efficiency in printing out.
And this was the first application then of these fused optics.
That's right. He had a boundary condition, which we were not aware of at first, and that was that this bundle had to be baked out to obtain a good hard vacuum at about 750 to 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Mm-hmm. The plastics which we had available simply wouldn't stand up to this temperature. They burned out. This forced us to go to a glass cladding on the fibers, as Walt Siegmund explained to you. Using the glass cladding as a bonding agent, we were able to press these fibers together and get what appeared to be a solid block of glass. And this could be baked out and was vacuum tight.
Mm-hmm. Now these fibers are pretty small.
They are. At that time, we were working with single fibers, which we drew down about to the size of a human hair. The image quality was really barely passable. It sufficed for some applications. But having gone through glass cladding, another element entered the picture almost simultaneously. Dr. Frederick Norton, who was at that time at MIT, suggested to me that it was foolish to draw down all these small fibers and then go through the torture of trying to get them aligned. That we should try to duplicate decorative glass working, which was common to the Venetians. You've probably seen this in paperweights. It's called millefiori. Mm-hmm. And the rods of glass are of different colors. What he suggested, though, was to take the bundle, a large bundle of rods of glass, fuse these together, heat them, and draw them down.
Each one of these rods had already been coated.
Each one had been coated, and they were bonded by the cladding glass. Mm-hmm. We end up with something like this. Now that piece is mechanically large, easy to handle, economical to produce, and perfectly aligned by its very nature. Mm-hmm. No problem about aligning it. That particular bundle there probably has 50,000 fibers in it. So it still has, well, as a matter of fact, it has much more resolution than we could obtain with the single fibers.
And is this an example of the actual scope face?
It's a present example. This is many dollars and several years later, but the type of thing that this fellow wanted to produce is represented by this here. This big faceplate, as you see, has a curved inner face. Look at this. Mm-hmm. And it sits down vertically for a radar display. The image which comes from the radar display is presented on the top surface. This allows the user to plot with a crayon on the top surface and not have any parallax between that and the image. So this is a different advantage from the one I mentioned before.
Is this the main advantage of this?
Well, there's another advantage. Well, the field curvature in the bottom is a sort of a side effect, that the natural surface of best focus of the electron tube is a curve. But a more important advantage is illustrated by this piece of glass right here. By cladding the fibers with an absorbing coating, you can control the angle of light which is allowed to pass through. Dr. Siegmund mentioned that we could get numerical apertures up to 1. In this case, we work with a very limited numerical aperture, so that we accept about a 30-degree half angle. Now I will hold this up, and when it's tilted straight at the camera, you can see through it. When it's tilted off axis, it turns completely black. The same feature is incorporated in this plate. Now you might ask why we want the feature in the plate. You've probably noticed in watching a television set in the daytime, if you don't pull your drapes, the scene is washed out. The poor fellow looking at this has a much worse job. He's up on the deck of a battleship. The sun is beating down on the thing, and he couldn't see anything at all unless he had a hood, or unless he limited the angle of light which would get through this to hit the phosphor.
So he has to look directly down into that then.
He looks more or less straight down into it.
What other applications do you have for the fused optics?
Well, having developed large blocks of glass which handle just like a simple glass, it could be machined, ground, polished, and drawn, distorted under heat, we found that there were many other things we could do. Over on your left there is an example of the first thing that might occur to you. You can take a fuse block like this, put it in a furnace, and draw it, and produce a taper. I think the camera shows that this is smaller at this end than that. The fibers that start here and up there. As a result of this taper, you can get magnification or demagnification very easily. I'll attempt to demonstrate this. If I place this way, I get a demagnified image of the original. If I place it this way, I get a magnified image of the original.
Yeah, that's matchy there.
Yes. You can't see through it, but probably the camera can see your eye through it if they catch your head on.
What is this interesting looking one?
Well, the next thing that might occur to you, in optics, it's often desirable to rotate an image. This piece was heated and twisted. I'll show the effect here. The image is rotated 135 degrees or so. There's the original, there's the rotated piece. We could rotate it any amount we wanted to.
And this very large one?
Well, this large one here, as you can see, is bent in 2 planes. And it illustrates that although fused fiber optics is inherently inflexible, if you know what path you want it to follow, you can heat it up and make it follow that path.
So this one then would simply follow a given path that you'd determined before.
That's correct, and I believe I can show that the thing does carry an image, in fact.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Hicks. Now over to John Mackenzie.
Although scientists and engineers are learning to do some remarkable things with optics, nature has been using the same principle for a good many million years. Dr. Shamos discusses fiber optic systems in human biology with Dr. Elias Snitzer, Chief of Optical Physics for the American Optical Company.
Dr. Snitzer, where in animal systems do you find the most direct analog of fiber optics?
The light-sensitive receptors in the eye are in the form of fiber optic elements. This can be seen by looking at a picture of the eye. A scene is focused by the lens of the eye onto the back portion of the eye, which contains the retina. This is analogous to a photographic system such as a camera. Now, the retina consists of a large number of small fibers, all of which are facing towards the lens. The central portion of the retina, which is called the central fovea, is the portion with which we see the highest visual acuity with. And this consists of tiny fibers about 2 microns in diameter. The intersection is such that all of the fibers are touching one another, so that the fibria consists of a continuous membrane, all of which have elements pointing towards the lens.
This is an enlargement of this small region.
Yes, it is. And this is the portion with which we see greatest detail when we're looking at an object.
What does an end-on view of this look like, that is looking from the front?
An end-on view is shown in the next slide. Here one sees a picture of the retinal receptor in the eye. This was taken from the classic book by Polyak. The spacing of each of these fibers is about 2 microns, with a diameter slightly less than that for each of the elements. And for comparison is shown to scale a set of glass fibers which have been fused together.
Approximately the same size, apparently.
Yes.
It's actually the scale.
Yes, it is.
What range of sizes do you find in animal eyes?
Well, the sizes will vary considerably between different animals. In the case of the human eye, as I mentioned a moment ago, it's about 2 microns in diameter. If one goes to the frog, it increases to about 6 microns in diameter. Generally speaking, eyes which show the greatest visual acuity have the smallest diameter size for the retinal receptor.
So the human eye has a rather large visual acuity among animals.
Yes, it does. In order to make it possible for the eye to absorb efficiently, however, the length of the receptor is increased.
I see.
So, for example, in the case of the hawk, which is an animal which has a great deal of visual acuity, the retinal receptor is down to approximately a micron in diameter, with a length which increases to about 70 microns.
Well, if you want to improve the visual acuity, why don't you simply make the fibers smaller? In the case of the fiber
There's a
optic
limitation
device.
here which is imposed by the wave character of light. As soon as the diameter of the receptor or the fiber gets to be comparable to the wavelength of light, one gets these characteristic standing waves, which is shown in this set of, these are shown here in this set of 6 for glass fibers. What happens here is that light can propagate down the fiber only in discrete patterns, or so-called modes, waveguide modes. Now, in the case of the shots which have been shown thus far, where one has essentially a uniform illumination of light across the end of the fiber, this is the result of exciting a large number of these modes. And because each of these mode patterns are slightly different, it appears like one has a uniform illumination of light.
Well, for example, the simplest pattern there would be what?
The simplest pattern is a uniform illumination. There's, as you decrease the diameter of the receptor, or the fiber, the number of possible distributions of light which can propagate decreases, until finally one gets down to the point where only this pattern can propagate. Now, if this is decreased still further, the light tends to be carried in the cladding. Now, if one has a large number of these fibers stacked together, the net result of this is that one transfers energy from one fiber to a neighboring fiber.
The crosstalk that we
Yes.
talked about before.
And the crosstalk would degrade the image. The net result is that if one wants to get maximum acuity or maximum resolution in the case of a glass fiber bundle, there's an optimum size for the element.
What studies have been made of these modes in animal eyes?
Well, here are shown some pictures that were taken by Dr. Enoch at Washington University in St. Louis. These were quite difficult to take because this required removing the eye and very quickly making the observation before post-mortem changes took place. What this showed was that the modes which exist in the eye are those which correspond to small glass fibers. That is, just the lowest order modes appear in the case of the eye.
These effects, as the visual effects, depend upon the size of the fibers.
Yes, they do. Thus far, the only effect which has been clearly established as being related to waveguide mode effects is the so-called Stiles-Crawford effect, which is a directional sensitivity for light received by the retinal receptor. It's possible to construct a theoretical model whereby one can infer color dependencies. However, there's no direct experimental evidence for this as yet.
Well, these modes remind me of the modes one sees in lasers. I know that you've done some work in this. In fact, you developed one of the glasses that is used in lasers. And a great deal of work has been done in biological research in the use of lasers, as well as some clinical work. Can you tell me about it?
Yes. Well, first, in making the transition from the fiber to the laser, if one takes a length of fiber and terminates it with end reflectors, one is able to get a standing wave rather than a traveling wave, which is characteristic of the waveguide mode.
Yes.
And in the standing wave established, the light builds up when laser action occurs. So these patterns shown here are essentially the same as the patterns which one obtains from a laser. Now, the type of laser which I'm going to talk about is the so-called solid optically pumped pulsed laser.
Yes.
The analog is shown here, or the typical laser is shown here. It consists of a flash tube, which is electrically energized, next to a laser rod, and both enclosed in a reflector, such as to efficiently couple the light emitted from the flash tube to the laser rod.
Right.
Now, an essential feature that the laser rod must have is that there must be reflectors placed around it so that standing waves can be established.
Mm-hmm.
The conventional laser rod is one where the reflectors are on the end of the rod. When the flash tube is energized, light is given off, which is subsequently absorbed by the laser rod. Fluorescence occurs from the laser rod. Some of this fluorescent light travels towards the end reflector, and if the conditions are appropriate, the light which is traveling towards the end reflector builds up by multiple reflections between the ends. The net result is that there's an intense burst of light emitting from the end of the laser.
In the case of the fiber laser?
In the case of the fiber laser, the design is a little bit different. Here one has a flexible fiber which starts at one end with a reflector, travels down next to the flash tube, then the fiber loops around and comes back and emerges from the same end.
You've brought one here that you can demonstrate.
And here's a fiber laser which I can demonstrate. First, before energizing this, it's necessary for us to put on eye protective goggles.
Because of the energy of the light coming out?
Yes, that's correct. If you'd be kind enough to help me by holding that exposed piece of film. Now, on the count of 3, I'll flash the laser. 1, 2, 3.
I see. And you've burned a hole in the emulsion, as
Yes,
you've actually burned off the emulsion.
That's correct.
Could you try it again?
I'll do it again, yes. On the count of 3 again. 1, 2, 3.
It certainly burns the hole off. Thank you very much, Dr. Snitzer. Now over to John Mackenzie.
From all indications, the future of fiber optics is certainly promising. In medicine, we can certainly expect greater use of flexible fibers, not only for endoscopic procedures such as visualizing the intestinal tract, but there's a good chance that we may soon be able to use fiber optic catheters to look at heart valve pathology prior to surgery or medication. Image transmitting fibers have been inserted in hypodermic probes to photograph tissue beneath the skin. A light source is coupled to the instrument, and a portion of the fiber bundle is devoted to carrying light to illuminate tissue when the hypodermic probe is beneath the skin. After the observer has visually checked the picture, a camera can be put in place at the eyepiece. Research is also going on to find out how fiber optics can be used to amplify very low-level light to a comfortable viewing level. We may even see the time when we can drive without any headlights at all and see far better than we could with them. Only time will tell how many remarkable and useful applications fiber optics will find. I'm John Mackenzie, and this has been the Science and Engineering Television Journal.